Okay, well, we're going to start, and I want to officially welcome you to Speakout's You Can Do It Online webinar series, brought to you from Miami, Florida on a slightly overcast day. And I'm delighted each and every one of you is here with us now. Part of what we're here to do together is to help each of you become even better than you already are when it's your turn to be at a virtual meeting or to deliver a presentation. Now, a couple of months ago, early March, I went to a wedding in Los Angeles. It was my nephew's wedding. Los Angeles was just on lockdown then, just beginning to be on lockdown. And I was a little concerned about the virus, but not really too much. I went, came back, and I developed a sty on my eye. And it got worse and worse. It became pink eye. And I thought maybe I had the virus. So I called to make an appointment. Took 45 minutes to get somebody to answer the phone, made an appointment, and I mentioned that I was having vision problems that I couldn't see, and they said, whoever drives you has to be in the car and get tested, and further, bring lots of food and water, and make sure you go to the bathroom before you get to the testing site, because if you get out of the car, we can't test you. So it was a Tuesday morning around 11 o'clock, and as you'll see in the picture I have in front of you, there were cones and cones and cones and rows, but there were practically no cars in the entire Marlin Park Stadium where the Marlins baseball team plays. So we get to the tent, the first tent, and in the window of your car, you have to put your driver's license and your telephone number. And we check in, and then they tell us, we have no confirmation number for the driver. They only gave me one confirmation number for the two of us. I could leave, come back, and do the test, but I couldn't see. So he told them I couldn't see. They let us through, made an exception. We went through station after station, and then we got to the actual testing site, which looks something like this. And there were only 2 or 3 cars in front of us in this entire stadium. It took 9 days to get the results of the test. He was negative. I was inconclusive. Can you imagine what that felt like? So by then I could see better. I drove myself on a Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock and repeated exactly the same scenario you just saw. Only this time it took just 4 days. And the good news was that I was negative. And my purpose for sharing the story with you was to remind you that the best laid plans, online and offline, don't always work, and that we need to remain positive and flexible and be looking for new opportunities to advance ourselves. And that's what the purpose of this webinar series is, and that is to give you new insights, techniques that you can begin using right away whenever it's your turn to be online for a meeting or for a presentation. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up in the next part of the series. Today, we're going to be focusing on how do you open your presentation. And next week, we're going to look at how do you create the right content, the right words, the right emotions in your message so that people will pay attention and give you what you want at the end of your message. In the third webinar, we're going to be featuring Terry Jacobs, who's a very well-known South Florida makeup artist. She does all the stars. And she's going to help you look really natural on camera. I've used some of her stuff today. I'm not an expert in it. I'm still learning, but it will help you. Webinar 4 is going to focus on how to avoid the 5 biggest mistakes that people can make online or in person, with a special emphasis on the closing part of your presentation. And in the 5th webinar in this series, we're going to be introducing you, or perhaps reintroducing you, to the 4 personality types that you find at a meeting or when you're making a presentation, so that you know how to adapt your content and your approach to more successfully reach the conclusion that you're trying to reach. Okay, so shall we get started? Yes? Okay. So today we're going to look at first why it's so hard to get people's attention. And you know that from your own experience already, I'm sure. What you can do to set the stage so that you have the most successful outcome possible. And then we're going to look at 6 ways you can open your presentation to grab attention from the very beginning. And by the way, you'll be able to use these opening techniques and sprinkle them throughout your message as well every time you introduce a new idea, a new topic, a new aspect of your business or the topic that you're presenting. So the first question is, why is it so hard to keep people's attention today? And you know you're dealing with this every day. You get a million texts. You get, if you're on Facebook, you get messages, you get emails. There are commercials constantly bombarding you on the internet, on television. And according to research, only about 12 actually get through. And you, of course, want yours to be one of those messages, don't you? And that's our purpose, one of our purposes for today. So the question is, how come some presentations get you hooked right away in the beginning, and others you're thinking, do I really want to watch this? Do I really need this? Of course, you don't want yours to be one of those, right? So when you think about it, most business people and most community leaders are out to persuade somebody to do something. They're not simply there to inform people. So persuasion is the art of getting somebody to do something that they probably wouldn't do if you didn't ask them to change behavior or do something. Alan Monroe was an industrial psychologist in the 1920s, and he developed his motivated sequence, which is at the heart of any successful presentation. And when you are trying to persuade me, or you're trying to persuade someone else, according to Monroe, there are 4 questions that come up immediately in our minds. The first question is, why should I listen to you? What's in it for me to listen to you? And then I might be wondering, what's in it for you if I listen to you? And the last question Monroe said was, who cares? Today's variation I learned from my daughter, who used to be a teenager, who's no longer a teenager. She made me a grandma 2 years ago. But I would be talking and saying something and blah, 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 blah. And she would go, Mom, nobody cares. Nothing has changed. So when you're putting together your opening as well as your entire presentation, you want to be aware of these 4 questions that you're focusing on as you collect your content and as you think about your opening remarks. Across the planet, our what we call sitting still quotient is shrinking. While, especially with all these stay-at-home measures, most of us have what we sit on kind of expanding. And there is a correlation. It doesn't mean because you have a big tush, you're going to pay more attention. The sad reality is that our attention span as a society keeps shrinking, and that's why your opening is so critical. Used to be that our attention span lasted from commercials, the time between commercials on television. Have it your way, plop, plop, fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is, the time between commercials. Then it started to shrink. And now, if you think of a clicker, the average attention span is 3 to 4 seconds, and then people are going on to something else. How can you override that? Now, I'm going to ask you to write an answer in the chat if you choose to, and we will give a prize at the end to the person who has correctly guessed the answer to this question. How long do you think a goldfish will pay attention? So if you would write in the chat box, what you think, how long you think a goldfish will pay attention, and we'll circle back to this at the end of the webinar. Any presentation has 4 basic parts. The opening, where you get our attention from the beginning, what we call the pre-body, which is the connection between the opening and the body. Give yourself a hug for the whole body. And then the close, if you can imagine giving yourself an imaginary pat on your bottom part, that's the close. Today we're focusing on openings because that's the critical, those are those critical first few moments where we decide whether you're worth listening to or not. Just before you actually open, let me go over a few recommended strategies. And online, all rules are meant to be broken, but you do want to welcome everybody, greet everyone. And then if you choose, you can do what's called an optional gracious throwaway line, where you say, I'm so glad all of you are here. And then you can go over whatever technology information you want to share. I, for example, reminded you that there's a little hand raised at the bottom, or you could write in the chat. And also at the end of the webinar, I'll be taking questions from those of you who raise your hands or write in the chat. And I can unmute you on the microphone. Try not to spend too much time in housekeeping, because people can get turned off if they already know it. Tell them your name, the organization you're with, and your position. And then you go into the opening. And then if you need to repeat the technical information, you can do it then. Okay, so let's begin with what I used to open up this presentation today. And that was what happened to me when I went for coronavirus testing. I'm going to ask you to think right now, what story, what personal story could you use to open your next meeting, your presentation? And think about it as I go through this. Now, it may be obvious, we don't need to say once upon a time, but I'm also going to discourage you from what you often hear. Let me tell you a story about. I think people over 6 don't really welcome that too much. They love stories, but just dive right into that story and tell it in the best possible way. It's always critical, of course, to practice that story aloud before you actually go do it. It's a good idea, too, to time it so we have an idea of how long it's going to take in case you are told you have 5 minutes or 7 minutes or whatever it is, you know how long the story is. And if you need to edit it, you can. So go ahead and write down something that comes to mind, a story that's relevant to your conversation. Because here's what I call the rope technique. I love acronyms. Relevance is the most important thing to telling a story. Just telling us a story for the point of telling us a story doesn't really work. Is it original? Today, almost nothing is original. You can find almost anything by Googling, right? But it at least needs to seem original. Similarly, you want to have a personalized approach to it. You don't want to sound like a robot. And it's got to be somewhat engaging and fun, or really evoke some kind of emotion, or the likelihood is I won't continue listening to you. One recommendation for now is to start collecting success stories you've had, videos that you see that you like, that you could use online and incorporate them into your presentation. There are a couple that I've seen recently that I'm not going to show you, but I can share with you videos on virtual meetings. And there was one gentleman all dressed in a tie and jacket sitting on a sofa and having a virtual meeting. And the next thing you know, you could hear in the background, his daughter was saying, "Daddy, I'm hungry. When are you going to feed me?" And he stands up and he's wearing his underwear. Another client told me recently that they were watching a webinar and a lawyer was being introduced, and he was being videoing himself at home in his bedroom, and he was wearing a nice shirt. But then he stood up, forgetting the camera was on because he wasn't speaking, and he went and made his bed. And everybody, the 40 people on that webinar, saw him make his bed in the little shorts he was wearing. So be cognizant of those kinds of things when it's your turn, but collect visuals to go along with your stories, and that will make you even more engaging. The second technique that I want to share with you today is to open with something that gets people to go, wow. Now, they may not say that, but your purpose is to get them to think, wow. Here are some examples. We're running out of drinkable water. It happens to be true, but in certain parts of the world, as you know, it's a terrible situation. In others, we have too much water. My personal portfolio is worth $29 million today, which is half of what it did before the beginning of the crisis. Not true, just made it up. But is there some kind of fact like that that you could use? And then I went online today to find these very sobering numbers, which you could open a presentation with. And worldwide, there have been almost 300,000 deaths from the coronavirus. And in the United States, there have been almost 85,000 deaths to date. Very sobering. How can you use data that you have to impress us, to engage us? So take a moment and just write down what kind of fact could you use to open up your presentation that's going to get us to pay attention. The third technique is one that I really like a lot, and it is something we've all grown up with. It's a variation of a story, and its purpose is to get people to kind of lean in and really listen to you. So we like horror pictures. You won't believe what happens next. And the reason we like suspense is that we grew up with these tales of suspense. Once upon a time, long ago and far away, there was a handsome prince and a beautiful princess. You know the rest of the deal, right? Those are the kinds of things that happen. I was invited yesterday to be on what's called the Huddle, that an accelerator program in South Dade runs. And the host, Danilo, asked me, can you tell me how you got into public speaking and maybe one of the moments that you remember that got you on the track today? That was a good aroused suspense question. And so I answered it this way. I started out as a journalist. I went to the University of Florida. I was a newspaper reporter. And then I started in my early 20s to freelance write. And so you say yes to almost anything, including writing speeches, which I had never done before. But I figured I took a speech writing class at the University of Florida. Of course I could write a speech. In the beginning, people paid me, they were happy, there were no problems. Notice how I'm building around suspense? And then it happened. I was invited to go hear one of my clients present his speech. Well, I was mortified. I wanted to crawl under the closest table. He was awful. Why? He was reading word for word what I had written. And he obviously had not practiced, and he was stumbling over the words and going and and I was humiliated. I learned from that the hard way, that there's a big difference of writing for the eyes and writing for the mouth. And I began coaching clients, insisting that I hear them say the presentation, started the training programs that we do today. How can you open your presentation to arouse suspense, to make us want to hear the rest of your presentation? Now, another way of opening, be sure right now, take a second and write out some reminder words to you about what arouse suspense opening you might be able to use. And remember, if you want to, when we're in the Q&A, I can unmic some of you and you can share what you've done and ask a question. Okay, the fourth technique works both live and online, and the basis is the same. You want, if you're online and people can see you, you raise your hand. If you're in front of a room, you can direct people to the chat room or raise their hand online. But the key variable to remember is that you want to ask a question that most people will raise their hands. This is a little bit of theatrics, a little bit of show business. You don't want a situation like I saw recently with when I was at a meeting and a woman who owns a public relations agency started her meeting like this. By a show of hands, how many of you have more publicity than you want for your business? Nobody'd been indicted lately. No one raised their hand. So she started out with an immediate barrier between herself and the audience. It is a little show businessy, is that a word? So you want to make sure that you have a question that the majority of people will raise their hands to answer. The fifth technique is called the promise to give them something. And again, similarly to the aroused suspense and the others, you want people to hang in, to stay with you for the presentation. And you do that by starting something like, by the end of my talk, by the end of my presentation, you're going to know, you will get, and then you mention whatever it is, the overview of what they're going to get. One of my favorite examples of this is by the end of our presentation, you're going to know 3 ways to lose weight without really trying. Now, I'm going to give you the answers to that in the next webinar, next week. The last technique I'm going to share with you today is also one of my favorites, both for live and online, and that's to use some kind of 3-dimensional object in the very beginning of your presentation. Now, I have 3 samples to show you. Who would have believed that this little piece of cloth would become an essential part of my wardrobe 3 months ago? And then if I were doing a conversation, I would continue that. Here's another one. How many of you feel like you're being worked to the bone these days with self-isolation, taking care of your family, taking care of your business, cleaning, all the stuff that we have to be doing? And the last example is, I'm going to invite you to meet Peter, the poser. He's my very wonderful teddy bear. Poser is an acronym for the 5 biggest mistakes that people make when speaking. And you'll be hearing more from Peter and learning from him in our 4th webinar. Where can you find props? You can get them online, magic stores, garage sales. Use your imagination. I have one that I use sometimes. It's a skeleton that I use if you're dieting too much. So think about props that you have. They don't have to be expensive. They can be things that you have, but how are you going to use them to get our attention in the beginning? And you can use them throughout your presentation as well, again, if they're relevant and if they're appropriate. 2 ways I do not recommend opening. One is, please be funny, but please don't tell us a canned joke to begin with. First of all, everything's on the internet today, so we probably heard it already. And second of all, people are so prickly and politically correct that you could be insulting without meaning to be insulting. And the other method that I don't recommend, and people of one gender tend to do one and people of the other gender tend to do the other, don't apologize for everything. If you have laryngitis, oh well, 1 sentence, I have laryngitis, really, it's pretty obvious. If you feel compelled to apologize, 1 sentence, get it over with, and please don't dwell on it, because either of these can detract from your authority as the expert. So I'm going to do a quick recap of what we've looked at today. The 6 techniques for opening your online presentation or your live meeting. First of all, you can tell some kind of story. Make sure you practice it ahead of time, you time it, and that it's relevant and there's a point in you telling that particular story. Start with a startling fact. Today, there's all kinds of data readily available. One that I also like to use is the fact that only one in a live meeting, and I can only imagine what it is online, 1 in 3 people is actually listening to you. only 1 and 3, according to studies, which is part of why we have to work really hard, isn't it, to keep each other's attention, and the opening is one way to do that. Arouse suspense. How can you tell us a story or an experience that gets us to lean in to listen to you? Ask for a show of hands, remembering to ask a question that you're most likely to get most people to agree with, because it's a show business technique, not necessarily fact-finding. And the last one is to use some kind of, a promise to give us something. Make sure you have identified, if you tell us you're going to tell us 3 things, make sure you tell us 3 things, because we're going to be listening for that. And finally, to use some kind of prop or exhibit, as you saw with Peter, or my mask over here. What can you use to open up your presentation? I'm going to remind you that next Thursday, we are having the second in this series, and we'll be focusing on the body of your presentation, the content, and the kind of words that you use. Now, today we do have some special offers for you, and we'll be sending you these as a link after the session. I'm offering each of you who is interested a complimentary 30-minute strategy session to help you, whether you're preparing a 2-minute video or a presentation, or you're leading a meeting. However I can help you, I'm available for 30 minutes. We're also going to be starting virtual Speakout coaching groups, maximum of 6, no competitors. So if you're interested, please let me know. We can talk about it. And then today we're offering a 20% discount on our collection of ebooks and videos on our website, speakoutinc.com. And if you put the code in, you'll get 20%. They're very reasonable. These are step-by-step ebooks that you can fill in to help you with your presentations, and videos that go more deeply into some of the aspects of speaking that could help you. Here's what's coming up in the next few weeks. Again, next Thursday is working on the body. The following Thursday will be how to more addressing your appearance on camera. On June 4th, we'll be looking at the 5 biggest mistakes that people make when speaking online and in person, and a special emphasis on the close. And the last in the series will be on dealing with different personality types and how you can adjust your presentation to be more effective. So at this point, I'm going to check the chat room to see what kind of questions we may have. We have a few guesses here. Okay, let's see the answers to the guesses. Okay, Karina is the winner of the guess of how long will a goldfish pay attention, and she is going to win a complimentary set of our ebooks. So Karina will send you the access code for that. There are the 4 ebooks are how to open, more deep dives, and there are 2 videos that go along with the 4 ebooks. So congratulations, Karina. And another question we've asked is, how long should a story be? And a story is as long as you need to take it, but not too long, because our attention span is really, really limited. I'm going to look and see. Okay. If I missed you asking a question with your hand raised, please send me the question, because for some reason I'm not able to see it on here. And so I'm going to wrap up with a thank you for attending. I look forward to seeing you next Thursday, same time, same place. And you're welcome to share this link with anyone you believe who would benefit. Okay, we look forward to, oh, I see there is one question here. What technique works better? Oops, just lost the question, sorry. Oh. For a knowledgeable and professional audience is the question. Oh, that's a good question. They all work, to answer your question. It really depends on what your expertise is. Some crowds are very numerical, so you may want to start with a really exceptional data point. Some crowds are more interested in being entertained. No matter how educated and professional they are, they could have been hearing a whole series of very deep content. And if you come on and you can be deep but fun at the same time, you're going to get the attention that you deserve. Would you agree? So I'm going to close by thanking all of you for attending and looking forward to seeing you next Thursday. And if you have any questions, please email us, or call us, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again. Bye now.